You wake up, your phone is already buzzing with notifications. Emails marked urgent, messages from coworkers, reminders of deadlines you can barely remember setting. You dive in, putting out fires all morning. By lunch, you're exhausted. Yet when someone asks what you accomplished, you draw a blank. You were busy, frantically busy, but you have nothing tangible to show for it. This is the modern trap of constant urgency, a hamster wheel that spins faster every day while getting you precisely nowhere. What if I told you there's a simple 4-quadrant matrix that can explain exactly why you feel this way, and more importantly, give you the key to escape it forever? This isn't just about time management. It's about reclaiming your attention, your energy, and the very trajectory of your life. Every single task, every obligation, every distraction that enters your sphere can be categorized into one of 4 quadrants on a simple grid. The vertical axis measures importance. Does this activity contribute to your long-term goals, values, and mission? The horizontal axis measures urgency. Does it demand immediate attention right now? Where you spend your time across these 4 boxes doesn't just dictate your productivity. It dictates your destiny. The first quadrant, quadrant I, is the domain of crises. It's for tasks that are both important and urgent. This is the heart attack, the project deadline due in 2 hours, the major client threatening to leave. These are true emergencies, and they require your immediate response. The problem isn't that these exist. The problem is when your entire life becomes consumed by them. Living in quadrant I is stressful, anxiety-inducing, and ultimately unsustainable. Turns you into a reactive machine, always on edge, always waiting for the next alarm to sound. Why do so many of us get stuck here? Because it feels productive. It feels necessary. There's a perverse sense of heroism in being the person who always handles the crisis. But this is a seductive lie. Every minute spent in quadrant I is a minute not spent building something that would prevent the next crisis. It's a vicious cycle. The more you neglect important but non-urgent planning, the more crises you create for your future self to handle. Now, let's contrast this with the most critical quadrant of all, quadrant 2. These are activities that are important but not urgent. This is the golden zone of personal and professional effectiveness. Think about exercise. It's profoundly important for your long-term health, but it's rarely urgent. No one is forcing you to go for a run at 7 a.m. Think about strategic planning, deep learning, building relationships, preventive maintenance, or true creativity. These things don't scream for attention. They whisper. And because they whisper, we ignore them. We tell ourselves we'll get to them when things calm down. But in a life dominated by quadrants I and 3, things never calm down. The magic, the breakthrough, the compounded success, it all lives in quadrant 2. The most successful people in any field aren't necessarily the smartest or the luckiest. They are simply the ones who have mastered the discipline of consistently investing time in quadrant 2 activities, thereby shrinking the size and frequency of quadrant I emergencies in their lives. Let's make this concrete with 2 detailed examples. First, consider a mid-level manager, Alex. Alex's days are a blur of urgent requests. Putting out team conflicts, responding to last-minute data requests from superiors, fixing shipping errors. He's praised for being a firefighter. He spends 70% of his time in quadrant I. The important but non-urgent work, mentoring his team members for future growth, automating a tedious monthly report, taking a course on leadership always gets postponed. 5 years later, Alex is still a mid-level manager, just with more gray hair and deeper burnout. His peers who invested in quadrant 2 have been promoted because they built systems and skills that made them irreplaceable, not just reactive. Second, consider a freelance graphic designer, Maria. Her quadrant 3, urgent but not important, is overflowing. Constant notifications from social media apps, text messages from friends during work hours, quick calls that turn into hour-long chats, emails about upcoming sales. She feels connected and needed, but at the end of the day, her portfolio hasn't improved, and her client base hasn't grown. She's traded focused, deep work, a quadrant 2 activity, for the dopamine hits of constant, low-value interaction. The cost is her craft and her competitive edge. These examples show the chain of logic. Ignoring quadrant 2 directly fuels the growth of quadrant I and makes you vulnerable to the distractions of quadrant 3. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of mediocrity. Now, what about quadrant 3? Urgent but not important. This is the quadrant of interruption and deception. The phone rings and you feel compelled to answer. A colleague drops by your desk for a quick question that isn't related to your priorities. These activities masquerade as urgency, borrowing importance from someone else's agenda. The key skill for escaping Quadrant 3 is the art of graceful decline and intelligent delegation. You must learn to question every urgent request. Is this important to my goals? If not, you say no, you delegate it, or you schedule it for later. You must guard your attention as your most sacred resource. Letting others plant their urgent flags in your mental soil is a recipe for a barren harvest of your own dreams. Finally, we have Quadrant 4. Not urgent and not important. This is pure escapism and time wasting. Mindlessly scrolling through social media feeds, watching television for hours without enjoyment, engaging in gossip. This quadrant isn't about rest. Rest is a purposeful Quadrant 2 activity for recharging. Quadrant 4 is numbing. It's what you do when you're too drained from quadrants I and 3 to do anything meaningful. The danger is that it creates an illusion of relaxation while secretly draining your energy and leaving you with a subtle sense of guilt and emptiness. The goal isn't to eliminate Quadrant 4 entirely, that's unrealistic, but to become conscious of it. To choose it deliberately for short periods, rather than falling into it by default. So, how do you operationalize this? The practice is simple but transformative. Every day, take a clean sheet of paper and draw the 2 axes, creating 4 boxes. Label them. Q1. Important and urgent, crises. Q2. Important and not urgent, growth and planning. Q3. Not important and urgent, interruptions. Q4. Not important and not urgent, time wasters. Now list every task, project, or distraction you can think of. Be brutally honest. Where does checking work email first thing in the morning fall? For most, it's Q3. It feels urgent, but rarely is it the most important thing you could do for your day. Where does planning your quarterly goals go? That's pure Q2. This act of visualization is shocking. It reveals the gap between where you think you spend your time and where you actually spend it. The strategic imperative is clear. You must systematically expand the territory of Quadrant 2 in your life. This requires a radical shift in scheduling. You don't find time for Q2 activities. You deliberately schedule them and defend those time blocks as if they are meetings with the CEO of your life, because they are. This is called time blocking. You block out an hour first thing in the morning for deep, strategic work, Q2. You block out 30 minutes for exercise. You protect these blocks from the incursions of Q1 and Q3. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. Your brain, addicted to urgency, will rebel. But slowly, a miraculous thing happens. As you invest in Q2, the fires in Q1 begin to dwindle. You get ahead of problems. You build systems. Your health improves so you have more energy. This isn't magic. It's cause and effect. You are building your future with intention, not reacting to the crumbling pieces of your present. This leads us to the profound psychological core of the Matrix. It moves you from being a victim of circumstances to being the architect of your experience. When you live in Q1 and Q3, you are at the mercy of external demands. Your sense of control is an illusion. When you anchor your life in Q2, you take back your agency. You decide what's important. You act based on your values, not on the latest alarm. This shift reduces anxiety and increases a deep, lasting sense of fulfillment. You are no longer just checking off tasks. You are building a legacy, one deliberate Q2 block at a time. Consider the long-term chain reaction. A person who spends 1 hour a day in Q2 learning a new language will, in a year, be conversational. In 5 years, they might be fluent, opening doors to new cultures, job opportunities, and ways of thinking. A person who spends 1 hour a week in Q2 building a side project could, in a few years, have a thriving business. A person who spends 30 minutes a day in Q2 exercising will, over decades, likely avoid chronic diseases that would have created Q1 health crises. This is the power of compounding applied to your attention. The small, non-urgent investments you make today don't just add up. They multiply. Let's talk about the enemy of Q2, the myth of balance. Many people think success is about evenly distributing time across all areas of life every single day. That's a recipe for frustration. True effectiveness is about dynamic prioritization. Some weeks, a major Q1 project will demand 80% of your focus. That's okay. The key is to not let that state become permanent. You must always return to Q2 as your home base. Furthermore, what is important is deeply personal. For one person, Q2 might be writing a novel. For another, it might be coaching their child's soccer team. The matrix doesn't dictate your values. It gives you a tool to live by them. Your Q2 is uniquely yours. Defining it is the first and most critical step. Now, implement this with a simple 3-step ritual. First, weekly Q2 planning. Every Sunday, identify 3 to 5 key Q2 activities for the coming week. These are your big rocks. Schedule them into your calendar first, literally. Second, daily Q2 activation. Each morning, review your Q2 block and protect it. Turn off notifications, close your door, do whatever it takes to guard that time. Third, the Q3/Q4 audit. At the end of each day, quickly review where you spent time. Did you fall into any Q3 traps? Did you mindlessly slip into Q4? Don't judge, just observe. This awareness alone will begin to change your behavior. The ultimate goal is to reach a state where the majority of your conscious, productive time is spent in Quadrant 2, with occasional forays into Quadrant I to handle genuine, unforeseen crises, which will become rarer. Quadrant 3 is minimized through boundaries and systems. Quadrant 4 is used consciously and sparingly for genuine mental breaks. This is not a theory. It's a practical framework for designing a life of impact and meaning, rather than a life of frantic activity. It answers the why behind the constant busyness. You've been optimizing for urgency, not for importance. You've been letting the loudest voice dictate your actions, not the wisest one. Look at any individual you consider truly successful or profoundly fulfilled. Deconstruct their habits. You will find, without exception, a non-negotiable commitment to their version of Quadrant 2. They read while others scroll. They plan while others panic. They build relationships while others network superficially. They invest in their health while others neglect it until it's a crisis. They understand that significance is built in the quiet, non-urgent spaces between the noise. Your time is the canvas of your life. The 4-quadrant matrix is your brush. The question is no longer, what's the most urgent thing I need to do? The transformative question, the one that will change everything, is, what is the most important thing I can do today for the future I want to create? Start by drawing those 4 boxes. Your future self will look back at today as the day you stopped being busy and started being effective.